Hi, I'm David Hakimi with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, and I'm here today with Kim Clancy of Mindful Mortgage. How are you today, Kim?
Great, David.
Good.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. So we're going to start back up with our series on how to win a bidding war in the hyper-competitive Denver market. Let's check out the rest of the points.
Perfect.
All right, number 4, loan types. Your loan type makes a big impact on the likelihood of the offer to get accepted. Unfortunately, when a listing agent is faced with a stack of 10 or 15 or 20 offers, they've got to resort to a vetting order of how they're going to rank everything from most likely to close to least likely to close. But remember, it's not all about just the highest offer. A lot of times the highest offer with the highest number, frankly, is BS.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other factors in it that make it flimsy and make it pie in the sky, and it's way more likely to fall apart than another offer that may be a little bit lower but is a lot more sound. One of the things that they're going to look at right off the bat to try and quickly categorize these is the loan type. Conventional or jumbo are typically the two loan types that have the highest credit score requirement, so you're going to have to be the strongest. Jumbo actually requires that you prove assets and reserve payments, and you're typically going to have a higher FICO score and just more stringent underwriting guidelines all around. But typically when I see a conventional loan, that's just an indicator that this is a strong buyer. They managed to get a conventional approval on their loan, so to me they're going to be stronger than the other types of loans, which would be next probably Veterans Association, VA, or Federal Housing Authority, FHA. And the worst, unfortunately, would be somebody relying on down payment assistance. Here in Colorado, we've got a big program called CHAFA. It's great in a different market. I used to actually use a ton of it. I helped a lot of buyers get homes with it. A fantastic program. I've got nothing bad to say about it, but I can tell you that if you're looking at it strictly through the lens of a listing agent trying to vet a stack of offers by loan type, unfortunately, CHAFA is not going to compete.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. I mean, at this point, I'm not even doing CHAFA because, my goal is to get somebody into a house, not to just keep running loan scenarios. And with a down payment assistance, not just CHAFA, there's several, but with them, it's just, they're just not being accepted.
Yeah.
So, we've tried to find ways to come up with 3.5% down, or even the conventional 3% down. We do try to come up with ways for that.
Gift from parents or relatives, or just
pulling out a 401k, even
exactly, because a first-time home buyer can pull out without penalty one time for a home down payment. That's a tax law that a lot of people aren't familiar with. So if you've got some 401k or IRA money sitting there, you can actually pull some of that out for your 3% without penalty. I did it on my first home purchase. I pulled 10% out to buy my first place, and I'm never looked back. I mean, one of my best sources of wealth has been the home equity that the 4 or 5 houses I've owned have built for me. So I would say that $10,000 put into dwellings outpaced what it would have left in those 401ks anyway. So it wasn't like I penalized myself. I put a roof over my head. I got myself out of the rental market, and I've gained a ton of equity over time. I mean, quite frankly, we started off when we first moved to Colorado back in 2001 in a townhome that was in a less than desirable part of town. It was a little shady, but hey, we bought it, we fixed it up, we learned how to do tile, we did some renovations to it. We sold it a couple years later for $30,000 more than we paid for it.
Wow.
We did that on our next one, and then we did it again on our next one. And quite frankly, we went from a sketchy part of town to $1 million home.
Yeah.
So, don't underestimate how powerful that money can be that you pull out of your IRA to get that first home down payment.
Well, I just have to make one comment.
Okay.
Because you know where I'm going.
Okay, I don't, but it was just hit me with
about the VA loans,
Okay.
because near and dear to my heart, and so I will always just try to continue educating people that when you see a VA and you see it's 100% financing, as a seller, as a listing agent, please don't disregard them, because there's reasons. Number one, not only did they earn the right to have that loan, okay, so let's kind of face that.
Sure.
But also, VA rates are our lowest rates. It's our lowest rate product, along with no mortgage insurance.
And I've heard that before. They're quite a bit lower than a conventional rate.
I mean, significant.
Give me an example. Like if conventional was at 3%, where would the VA be?
So 2.25.
Wow, so 3/4 of a point lower.
And VA has no mortgage insurance, and the conventional does, right? So I always, I'm going to just try to always educate that for a VA loan, it doesn't mean
that they're weak.
Doesn't mean
they're weak. Doesn't mean they didn't have enough money.
Nope.
That could have been one of a few factors that was really the least important.
Right. Well, and in this market, are you going to take money out of your account that's making 6 or 7%? or are you just going to pay a 2% interest rate? I mean, it's kind of...
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. You want to leave the money where it's earning and doing the most for you. So I agree. Now that we're in a period of historically low rates, a lot of people want to leave those investments alone. They don't want to get penalized for the withdrawal, so that does make more money. So I can agree with you on that. Not to mention, like you said, thank you for your service. Who wants to turn down the veteran? A lot of sellers don't want to be the jerk. So in certain circumstances, if the seller happens to be a veteran and they see a VA loan, that could be the ticket to get that.
It is normally.
It is, They're going to side with Simplify, boo-rah kind of thing. So I totally get it. All right, perfect. Well, the next thing then would be contingent versus non-contingent for our fifth point. We talked about it a little bit before. Contingency can be a deal killer, unfortunately. If I'm a listing agent and I've got that stack of 15 or 20 offers here, the first ones that I may toss out are the contingent offers. And basically contingency just essentially means they still have a house to sell. And it can come in varying degrees too, so that's worth talking about. There's lots of different levels of contingency. The worst would be some buyer calls me and says, hey, we want to go put an offer on this house we saw today on Zillow or Realtor.com or wherever we saw it, and we still have a house we need to sell. We need you to come look at that next week, but today we want to go put an offer on this house. Unfortunately, you're not going to fly probably, because to a seller, that's the absolute riskiest. You're telling me you want to buy ours and you haven't even started to market yours yet. It's not on the market.
Right.
And of course, the next level would be, here's our offer to buy yours. Ours is listed, but it's not under contract. The next level after that would be, we're under contract and we're past the inspection, which is a big hurdle. The two big hurdles on any deal are usually inspection and appraisal, and of course credit underwriting. So they're the three, but the two that are timeline sensitive would be the inspection and the appraisal. So of course the third and least delicate contingency would be one where they're past the least risky would be the one where they're past the inspection and the appraisal, and they're just counting days on underwriting. Sometimes we can actually get those contingent offers accepted if they're pretty far along, and I can say, hey, we're contingent, but we're under contract, we're past inspection, we're past appraisal, we're just counting days, and we'll have our lender call you. That's where you would step in and do your job.
Well, and the thing is that, the people that, if somebody comes to me for a pre-approval and they have to sell a house, number one, I try to figure out how we don't have to sell the house, right? And so obviously everybody wants to, but as you know, when you close on a loan, you skip up to 2 months of payments. So, and in this market, your house is selling in 2 months. So we try to look at that first, but on the back side of that, I do see a lot of listing agents and sellers accepting properties if you are at least through inspection.
Okay.
So that is a positive. If
everything else on the offer is really, really
absolutely,
strong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's got to be super solid on every other count, but it can happen.
Yeah, but you can't. You can't not even have your property on the market.
Yeah, you can't do it when you're super early in the process. It's most likely going to get tossed out, I would agree. So, contingent versus non-contingent. We want to try and be non-contingent. And like you said, there are other strategies. You can get a bridge loan up front. And some people simply make enough money that they don't have to sell the first one.
Correct.
If you get a really high income earner earning several $100,000 a year, they may make enough money that their debt-to-income ratio perfectly allows them to keep the existing house in their possession and qualify to get a second loan, and it doesn't phase their debt-to-income ratio. So if they're in that position, it's very beneficial. And a lot of people want to do that because right now housing is at a super high demand. Rentals are at a high demand. They're at a premium. Rents in Denver are through the roof. So if you can keep that original house and turn it into a rental, turn it into an Airbnb, if it's in the right neighborhood, you can turn that into an asset that's just going to keep appreciating, probably at least lately faster than the stock market's having. So there's definitely circumstances where you don't necessarily have to be contingent, even if you want to keep the old house in your possession. So that would be another avenue to go if you're well-heeled enough to do it. Number 6 would be a leaseback. Leasebacks. We're seeing a ton of them. We've talked about them. Goes back to some of those other points that we touched on. A lot of times these sellers basically say, look, we want to sell our house, but we're not 100% sure we're going to be able to find a replacement quick enough because there's only 1/10 the normal inventory out there. We need to know that if we take the risk to list our house and sell our home, that we're going to be able to find something to replace it with. So a lot of times, they're going to say, look, we'll sell it to you, but we need you to let us stay in it for 60 days after it closes. And that can either come, once again, it comes down to how competitive the bidding is. Obviously, as a buyer, you may offer them that say, hey, we need you to at least make our mortgage payment. We'll lease it back to you, but we do need a little bit of rent on it every month. But unfortunately, it's so competitive lately.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that.
I'm not
really
seeing much
at
of that
all.
either. The people that gave it to us when we sold our house gave it to us 60 days free because they knew that's what it was going to take to beat the other offers.
Well, remember last January we started seeing the leasebacks.
Yeah.
But you paid for them.
You paid for them.
And then it was kind of like, all right, you're paying some of it.
Yeah.
And now it's like you're not paying any of it, and we're getting the full 60 days.
Yeah.
That's
And
pretty
you're
much
right. And they weren't always for 60 days. And sometimes the seller doesn't need 60 days.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to that initial number one point that we made, the conversation that the agent has with the buyer's agent has with the listing agent.
Yep.
What are the motivating factors? What are the closing timeline preferences? How much time does your seller need? Sometimes they'll tell you, hey, now they've already been transferred out of state by their company.
Right.
Relocation company paid for all this. Relocation company guaranteed it. They're going into temporary housing. We just want the fastest closing possible.
Right.
So you don't always have to have a lease back. It's going to come down to what the seller's preferences are.
Sure. Agreed.
Yeah.
And then number 7.
Number 7, as is. A lot of times we're seeing that buyers, in order to be competitive, have to mitigate the seller's exposure. And the two things that will always put a seller at exposure would be when they have to negotiate the price up front, and then when they have to negotiate the potential repairs after the inspection. In fact, that can kill more deals in a normal market than anything is what pops up in the inspection. Inspection is probably one of the biggest deal killers. But right now, when we're in such an extremely seller-skewed market, a lot of times the sellers are in the driver's seat enough that they can say, hey, if you want our place, you have to take it as is. We're not going to fix anything. We need you to put it in writing that that you're not going to ask us for anything. And once again, just like contingency, as is can come in different levels. The first and strongest would be we're going to waive our right to inspect it altogether. We're not going to put a deadline on the contract that gives us the right to back out whatsoever over post-inspection issues. So a completely waived inspection is going to be the strongest level of as is. The next level of as is would be, hey, we're not quite comfortable with not inspecting it at all, but we're going to inspect it and then take it or leave it. So unless something huge comes up that's just a massive problem that makes us want to walk away from it, we're not going to ask you to fix anything. Then, of course, a little bit weaker than that would be we're going to ask you only to fix something if it's a major health and safety item or a structural issue. You've got radon gas, you've got a bad roof, you've got a bad foundation, you've got mold infestation. Yeah. Any of the big ones, or a bad sewer line, those can be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to fix a bad sewer line. So they may say we're only going to back out or ask you to fix something if it's major, and usually they'll put a dollar amount so that we define major. They'll say we're only going to ask for those major items if they're going to be more than, say, $2,000 to fix. And I will say that every once in a while we'll get an offer that's so strong in every other way, like maybe the dollar amount is so much higher than the next closest dollar amount that's the only thing that they weren't quite as strong on. They were reserving the right to ask for a few repairs, and we will still take the offer because the dollar amount was so much further ahead of the next closest offer that the seller says, I think my house is in pretty good shape. I'm going to gamble on that. And, for the most part, sellers know how good their house is. I will say I did have one get a little bit burned by a bad sewer line on that. They ended up having to replace the sewer line. It was about $7,000 or $8,000, but the offer that won was like $30,000 higher than the other offer. So they were still, like $22,000 ahead of the next highest offer, even with that sewer line. So it was still a win-win for all the parties involved. So that's basically writing an as-is contract.
But you know what? Can I interrupt?
Yeah. Go ahead before we move on to
the thing is I just, from a personal standpoint, I just don't think that somebody should waive an inspection.
I agree. And as an agent, I never would advise anybody to waive an inspection. It's just not safe. I mean, you've got to be super, super solid and sure about that house in order to waive an inspection. And that all comes down to a lot of times the age of the house. If we're talking about a 2-year-old house that just left warranty, odds are everything's probably pretty solid on it. If we're talking about a 10-year house, a little more risky. Yeah. If it's a 20-year-old house, a lot more risky. If we're talking about some of these historic places like in the Highlands or Wash Park, no way, Jose, am I having anybody buy that. I mean, those older 100-year-old houses can have some really funky stuff going on with them. I mean, I know people love them. They've got charm and character, but old houses, you want to know. And old houses have old house problems. So a lot of that advice is going to boil down to the age of the house and the condition of it. And once again, it'll come down to your buyer's agent too. I mean, I don't claim to be a home inspector, but I also write 100 inspection objections a year, and I field nearly that many for our team. I mean, I know what to look for, and I frankly, I'm walking through 1,000 houses a year, and I've been doing it for 10 years. I'm almost at the level where I can inspect 90% of the things that a home inspector is going to catch. Of course, I can't test for radon. I can't test the electrical panel. There's things you can't do without specialty tools, but visual stuff like bad foundations, grade, cracking, heaving, settling, that sort of stuff, I can typically spot that in advance, and we'll know if we're getting into something that's fairly stable or not. So,
well, you do a great job. Even, I mean, I've seen what you've done, even on new builds. I mean, you're great at walking through new builds and picking up,
seeing things that aren't the code, seeing corners that were cut, seeing things that were improperly framed, improperly routed. Don't think that just because you're buying a new house, everything's going to be perfect. In fact, the house we're standing in right now, when I did my pre-drywall inspection, they had done something really funky with the way they were routing the air conditioning line as it came in from the outside to the mechanicals. They wanted to take the lazy route. Instead of tucking it nice and neatly out through the floor joist and the ceiling, they try to just run it under for a long stretch where it was exposed and running diagonal. And I'm looking at this thinking, if I want to finish this basement and that thing's hanging through like it is right there, it's going to cause a nightmare. This needs to be carefully tucked and properly routed. So I put my foot down during that pre-drywall inspection and said, I'm not moving further forward unless you guys reroute this and do it properly. So absolutely, we do pick up stuff even on new construction that can be a problem if you don't catch it early enough.
So thank you so much for watching part 2 of our video. We hope that you learned some things. And if you want to watch other videos or continue this, please like and subscribe. You'll find all the information below. Also, you can find information to apply online for me and David's contact information. And that's all that we have for you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.